button and letting everybody in. And oh, I just realized something. I forgot to spotlight everybody. Ooh, ooh, ooh. We were having such an interesting and letting everybody in.
Oh, I heard Abby twice.
Oh man, we were having such an interesting conversation with the panelists that I forgot to do my job, which is to set up the room. The conversation was so interesting that I just
It's all your
completely.
fault.
I'm so
All your
sorry,
fault.
guys. I'm so
All your
sorry.
fault.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm just, you're going to have to watch me set this up. Just give me. All right. I think we're good. I
It's
think we're
cool.
good.
Yeah, you do such a phenomenal job hosting, Navi. It's okay. I think everybody over here is familiar with you by now.
Say more. Say more. I'm super excited for today's call, today's chat, guys, today's call, today's Zoom chat, today's session. This one, even when we were setting up the conference, I remember like having these conversations with Monarch back and forth, like, do we really want to talk about how boot camps build their curriculums? Who's going to be interested? That was the first question that we asked. And the immediate answer was, not enough people know the methodologies that goes into just setting up the stage for students to be successful. What are some of the principles that go behind, what are some of the languages or frameworks or libraries that are trending on the employer side? What does the tech industry care about? And how often is that curriculum updated? So, and then of course the conclusion was we ended up going with this session. So I'm super excited for all of you to be here today with our panelists. I'm going to get into introductions. So I usually do a quick introduction, and I kind of want you guys to spend a little bit more time going into, a little bit of your background and what you did. So I see Dan, Brian, and then Monarch, and I'm going to go in this direction. So Dan, thank you so much for joining today's conversation. I'm very excited to have you. I've talked about this with a few people that it's really interesting having someone who has 26 years of experience from the university world. You were chairman at Cal Poly, and now you're a chief evangelist, business development manager, and a employer partner at Full Stack. What do you not do with them?
Well, I'm really excited to be part of this panel today. So a little bit about my background. I have a computer science degree from a school in California, Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. A few decades ago, when I was working at HP, we started the Computer Science Advisory Board at Cal Poly, and I've been involved with that from the beginning. So I've been involved a lot with higher ed on the employer frame of reference. I started a software analytics firm that over time did well enough and sold. And then I realized I really want my personal why. I want tens of thousands of people with head of household tech jobs that wouldn't have happened without my direct involvement. And then I had to figure out, well, where can I work to do that? So I work for a company who has been around since about 2013 doing coding boot camps, Full Stack Academy. And then I work on the employer side to figure out what they need. And I work with a lot of our university partners. We started being in New York City. We also had an operation in Chicago. Now we have partners with 16 universities, including 5 in California. So to me, it's really just making a tech education available, 3 months full-time, 6 months part-time, and then figuring out how do we do it in a way that our grads are able to get a great job, knowing they better be lifelong learners because it's a moving target. And so that's a lot of what we'll talk about is how do you figure out what to cover and not to cover in such a short amount of time, because in a 4-year degree, you have a lot of time in classes that have nothing to do with the tech stack you're going to be working on. Yeah. And so that's what I'm happy to talk about. A lot of my frame of reference will be what I've heard from employers, because I've been an employer for many years, and the employer's frame of reference is very interesting. What I've heard to a large degree is if you can know one stack very well, we believe you can do a second. One of the terms we use is test for our depth and then trust us for the breadth, because we don't have time to do both in such a short amount of time. But that's my background, and I'll be happy to answer questions when we get a little deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on, I want to ask you your first question. Have you watched the show called Chair on Netflix?
No, what is it? Tell me about it.
Oh man, it's right up your alley. It's actually it's really interesting. I think you'll like it. It's Sandra Oh, and
Oh, okay.
yeah, so she's sort of like the first minority woman that gets the English department chair in I forget the city, but it's a university in the States, and it's just really funny.
I like her. I'll
Yeah,
watch that.
it's really funny because like it kind of touches on some of the how the university system is not as appealing to young folks anymore, how they're sort of like having to compete with the online space, and like and a lot of the faculty is not necessarily adapting new age and innovative methodologies of teaching. It's really interesting, and then you're kind of going through the lives of the characters in the show. I think you'll enjoy it.
I'll take a look. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So to our next guest, Brian, thank you so much for joining this panel. I'm equally excited to have you here. You've been doing curriculum building for, I think, about a decade now. And plus you have a lot of experience in gamified training solutions as well. So I'm really interested in kind of like hearing your perspectives on like what this sort of revolution of boot camps in the last decade has really been all about, and what is the next decade going to look like, and why is the boot camp grad so adapt to learning new information?
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I guess a quick version of my life story. So I was sort of the classic smart kid who didn't do well in school. Got good test scores, didn't do my homework, that kind of thing. When I graduated high school, there really weren't boot camps yet, or at least they weren't popular enough that I knew about it. I, funny enough, started as a computer science major, and I quit because I was learning how to program in a classroom without computers in it, which didn't work so well for me. But then over the span of 10 years, eventually got a degree, did teaching, did a bit of work with educational video games, and eventually found myself into this really cool world of boot camps and a new way of teaching. And I'm really enjoying, our work to transform education and to figure things out. I think that the best thing that boot camps provide is a lot of different solutions for different people. And universities are great at a lot of things, and they've got a little more learning and experience. I think universities have been around for about 800 or 900 years, and we've been around for 8 or 9 years, maybe a little more than that. But I really do love, having the opportunity to work with people in their learning, in these life-changing journeys. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't. As the kid who used to complain about tests, I do like being the one who can change the test if I don't like it. But then I'm also, of course, seeing things from the other side and realizing that sometimes there's a reason for things to be the way that they are.
That's interesting. Oh man, I actually didn't even think about testing. Okay, we're gonna touch up on this a little bit later. But no, I love your background so much. It's like it's really interesting how like because you used to work for is it okay if I mention you used to work for the government?
Yeah.
You used to do kind of like training solutions for them. And it's interesting how you like made the switch over to education after that. What was sort of that difference for you?
Well, I mean, honestly, for personal reasons, I needed a remote job, and this is something that never happens. No one ever gets this lucky, but literally the first one I found and applied for was perfect. I got into teaching professionally from, when I eventually did figure out some things. I I went back to a university. I got straight A's. I won all of the awards in addition to starting a funded company. I taught at that university for 6.5 years, and I love teaching. But ultimately, as a non-terminal degree instructor at a very middle of the road university, it unfortunately doesn't pay a living wage, and it's a problem, throughout the university system that they need to work out. And I just thought I didn't get to teach anymore, honestly. And then I found this world of boot camps where, the instructors have to be capable of being a software engineer. And as such, although we're still figuring out some details of this, usually get paid much closer to a software engineer's salary. And I was actually very sad to leave that job, but very excited that I found this wonderful new world.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that's one of the things that when I think about bootcamp industry, I almost look at them as startups because they have the same mindset. So even inside of like what happens with the faculty and the structure of the team that's sort of like teaching you, whether it's the instructors or even like consultants that they bring in to like, actually App Academy is one of the few boot camps that actually has a curriculum person in-house. A lot of them are actually bringing in consultants. So that was actually interesting to connect with you. But yeah, like I agree with you where like, in order to, Monarch actually wants to, he's told me like, he's like, my life plan is eventually go back to academia and become a professor. Like, would you be okay with that? I'm like, you do you, right? Like whatever makes you happy. And so it's interesting that like, in order to be a professor, you can't just come, you can't just come with like 20 years of knowledge in the field, but you need to have that certification in our traditional models. So that's why I love boot camps. And I think that
well, it became an interesting challenge because for the first half of my time at the university, one of my mentors was the head of the department, and she kept calling me. It was like, "Oh, Brian, next semester, can you teach this? Can you teach this class on whatever?" It's like, "Oh, wait a minute, never mind. You don't. It's a master's degree class, and you don't have a master's degree. You can't teach it." And so it's just because I don't have a master's degree or an advanced degree, I'm not allowed to teach an elective on how to use my expertise for people who this is not their expertise, but it's adjacently related to what they're doing.
Which makes no sense, like, because, like we've all been to, like, most of us have been to universities as well. And it's like the professors don't actually necessarily have experience in the field that they're teaching. A lot of their knowledge that they're sharing is just coming from being a professor. So, why would you not want someone who actually knows what it's like working in that career? But yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. And I mean, it ultimately digs into some deeper systemic problems in how we teach. And, I don't think boot camps are the end all be all solution, and we don't do things perfectly either. But, it's a challenge. One of my recent frustrations is that I've had, several conversations with people who state that, oh, well, you can't teach a teacher how to be a software engineer. That would be ridiculous. But so we just hire software engineers and teach them how to teach. I'm like, no, that doesn't work. Teaching is really hard. It's a special skill set with a lot of challenges of it in and of its own. And ultimately, I think for me, at least, the answer for most things comes back to a balance. And, we do want people teaching who have, some experience, but I do think that there is value in some of the structures in a university system in requiring this standard and requiring it because it, sometimes, like boot camps exist to break down barriers to entry. And I think that that's very important. But there's also something to be said about barriers to entry because it makes it safer. We, as much struggle as we have sometimes with our regulators, the average person isn't equipped to go look at a boot camp and see if the boot camp is qualified or not, if they're hiring instructors that work or not. And I do think that having some level of education for each level as a requirement, like universities do, is a way, not the only way, but it's a way of building safety into the system and ultimately trying to find some way of making it effective. But it also doesn't, it doesn't work for other things because of that example that I gave.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You bring up I've thought about this too, about like what the next decade is going to look like and how you're going to start seeing the differentiators between, because the market was so flooded. So you're going to start seeing that differentiation where like you start seeing like, hey, certain schools, they just are hiring better instructors. They're hiring like either, their curriculum is super strong or their outcomes team is super strong. They really pay attention to grad support. And it's not just like, I'm not going to name any company, but it's not just reports, but it takes a much deeper dive, just kind of like how we have on the university model. But I want to move on and introduce Monarch. We'll come back to this. Where do I start with introducing Monarch? So his background is a little bit different from the both of you. He's self-taught, and he came into this industry with no real experience in STEM. He was a lifetime, like, I guess, gamer, and I think that's where his curiosity came into development. But he's mostly self-taught, and that's how he broke into the industry. But then after being in the industry for a couple of years, he was like, you know what, I need a little bit more theoretical knowledge, and he picked up a master's in comp sci, and he did that for almost, I think you almost finished the degree, and then that had been like, when you're doing a master's and working full time, you're kind of doing it at a much, much slower pace. I think he had maybe 2 credits left, and he was like, and that's when he decided to like break away from working full time and open up his own consultancy. And he was like, the master's has given me all the knowledge that I need. Am I doing it for a piece of paper or doing it for knowledge? And then now he's mentoring other developers. So it's really interesting, the perspectives that he brings on to teaching from someone who doesn't necessarily have, either a university background in comp sci, or is building curriculums or understands the university model as well as you two do. That was my introduction.
That was great, because basically, I think to add on to what Navi said, I'm here as a foil for Dan and Brian. So you two are serious experts when it comes to the internal workings of boot camps and how these curricula are put together, and including universities as well, coming from Dan's experience. What I'm bringing to the table is I'm going to be the interlocutor. I'm going to be asking questions. I'm going to be posing different perspectives from my own point of view. So I've been on the hiring side, and I've hired both university grads, and we hired actually 10 bootcamp grads this last couple of years just for MintBean. I had the opportunity to mentor them, and I've mentored people from indirectly through MintBean. I think we're probably close to 70 or 80 different bootcamp locations marked, probably more. We don't really keep a strong count of that, but we've had people from across the continent coming to MintBean, and I've had the opportunity to set hackathon challenges for them, help them debug their code, mentor them on a one-on-one basis or in a group basis, just over time, building this community. And I have so much admiration for what the two of you are doing, and what the bootcamp sector in general as well is doing for education. And for me, since I was a kid, I've always, my middle school had this slogan. It was in Sanskrit. I grew up in India, but it said, "Knowledge is strength supreme." And I don't know why. Maybe I was an impressionable young kid. That kind of just stuck with me. And ever since then, I've just had this massive respect for education and knowledge. And when I look at how education and knowledge is disseminated in our high school system, in our university system, there's some things that are left to be desired in those systems. And when I look at the bootcamp system, they're doing so much right, but they don't have the maturity of those other two institutions. So they're also doing a lot of things that are not quite right. But the core of it, which is the delivery of education in an efficient manner, that you guys have cracked. Like that is, I have never seen an education system that worked this well, especially for technical education. I've never seen I've never seen an institution offer education like that. And I know how hard it was to break in as a software engineer. I basically spent like, I'd wake up in the morning, go to my full-time retail job and come back. On the way there and on the way back, I'd be reading a book on Java. And when I come back, I'd be coding away. So it was like a year of that before I got my first job as a developer. And I have just so much respect for boot camps, and that's what I'm bringing to the table. Is I'm going to be here to highlight the strengths of boot camps and also question some of the assumptions that may come up in the conversation. So, yeah, that's why I'm here. So thank you so much for hosting this Navi, and Dan, Brian, thank you so much for coming to our community. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Monarch. We already have a question in the chat, so I love that. I'm going to go right to it because I already have a list of questions. And sometimes when I go into my list of questions, I completely ignore chat, which I don't want to do today because we do have a more intimate session. So I want to focus on that. So Jamie asked a really good question. I would love to hear more about the gamification angle of education. How effective is it compared to other delivery modes, videos, lectures, project-based learning?
I guess I could start with that one.
You got a lot of background in that, Brian.
So to begin with, one thing and I'll talk about both sides of it, but we're really talking about two things here. There's gamification, which is the application of technologies and practices from games to things that are not games. And then there's game-based learning. And both can be very effective and both can be very ineffective depending on how well they're implemented. So a perfect example of gamification that everyone or lots of people should be familiar with is if you join up for a website, you join LinkedIn and you want to get in for the first time, you want to look around and it tells you to, what's your phone number? Skip. What profile picture? Skip. What are your interests? Skip. And then you go to the end of that, and there is a little bar in the top right corner annoying you, saying that you are 10% done finishing your setup, your things that they want you to do. And that's one of the best examples of really effective gamification right now, where it's a progress bar, it's an experience bar. You want to level up, you want to get to the end, and we're intrinsically driven to complete things. And so those kinds of things can be very effective. But then there's also things that can make things worse by adding them. And, the classic example, that can get toxic is points, badges, and leaderboards. Mm-hmm. In some circumstances, leaderboards have been shown to make people stop cooperating because they want to be the best. They want to be at the top. No, I'm not helping you. You're 2 points behind me and I'm staying in first place. Or it can just become trivialized and not, not in a meaningful way, not something that people buy into. And then it just becomes something stupid and frustrating. Like I've seen some things with like health insurance have things for your health where you get points by doing things, but there's really the connection doesn't work well. And so it just becomes an obstacle to doing something you would do anyway and turns you away from it. Then the other side of it is game-based learning, which I've been saying for more than a decade, and I haven't updated my estimation, but video games are going to be as critical for every aspect and every day of learning as books and videos are now. And the reason for that is, by their very nature, video games are learning engines. You must learn the rules of the system to succeed in the system. They teach you. And the best ones teach you without telling you anything at all, without doing tutorials, without doing any words. They guide you through this experience of learning this complex system. And they do it by making you fail over and over and over again, which is another really interesting thing compared to education, where we look at failure as a tragedy when it's actually desirable. And so the problem is that it's really hard to make it's really hard to make a video game, and it's harder to make educational video games. And right now they don't get the budget that they need. And so what you end up with are things that are not games. So like I remember taking a corporate training one time that it was made to be like a game, but it wasn't, because you pressed the button and it rolled the die, and the die always came up as 5 the first time, and your piece moved to this next thing. And then you got to learn about the 3 pillars that make this company better than all of the other companies. That's not a game. That's the window dressing of a game, and it makes it worse. And then the other side there are games that are not actually educational, or the educational part is not a game, where as a reward, you get to play a Mario clone. And then instead of rescuing the princess or prince, you get to do more math questions. And then if you do good enough, you get to move to the next level. And that's not a game either. But the merging the two of them, I think are very powerful. And there are some games that, even aren't as designed as educational games, like the Civilization series, have a lot of value in learning, culture and history. Even if it's made up history, it teaches about the relationships and politics in a world space, and I think helps you better understand how countries work, why countries get into trouble.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever, I think everyone shares my sentiments. That was a really excellent breakdown. I think when we think about gamification training, like a lot of the examples that you use are the things that you think of when you think about gamification in education. So maybe there is a lot of misinformation on like what that concept really is. Are there some resources that you would recommend when it comes to like what, especially because our audience is developers, and if they're interested in building gamification into their application or?
So unfortunately, I've been out of that world for a few years now, and I don't have any handy resources right away. But it's an emerging field. There is a lot of, really the search term to start with. Well, for gamification, searching for gamification, there is a lot of good reading readily available on YouTube. But then also there is a very large serious games community that are growing and improving and developing. And actually, one of the really neat things that I got to do when I was a contractor for the government is go to an expo, and there's all kinds of application game technology. I got to do a knee replacement surgery in VR, and that's gamification, or that's game-based learning, and that's actually one of the most important things to ask your surgeon if you're ever getting arthroscopic surgery is, do they play video games? Because they're half as likely to mess up if they do play video games than if they don't.
Interesting.
They're used to.
That's interesting.
I have so much to say to that. And I learned basically economics, how to play the stock market, what stock splits are, what short selling is, when I was 12 playing, I think it was Railroad Tycoon 2. And it had, like, you could, in the late stage of the game, you could actually buy other companies. So your railroad empire, when it grows, you can start investing your cash in other companies' stocks. And at some point, you can do a hostile takeover and you can merge the two companies. So I was doing hostile takeovers at the age of 12, which is quite the education for a 12-year-old. And it's so cool because there are also these JavaScript games out there and these SQL games out there. There's a SQL game out there where you do SQL commands and you set up your database, and they have these stored procedures in a loop where they update the database based on the locations of your planets and your ships around the planet and what your production speed is. You can like build an empire using SQL, which is really cool, across space, like a galactic empire using SQL, which is really cool. And there's so much potential over there for just, instead of presenting students with a chore, which is, here, go learn SQL, why not just give them the game and just say, hey, go play this game? And that's a practical problem for them to solve. And the only way they can solve it is by learning SQL. And the better they get at SQL, ostensibly at least, the better they get at the game. So there's a lot of, you really look into human psychology when you do that, like, for sure.
There's a term kind of tied to this that I like called edutainment, which is if you don't nail the entertainment part, the edu won't happen. And too often, like Brian says, you do a half attempt on the entertainment side, and then it just looks like this is pathetic. But I think if you can do both, I remember when I got my computer science degree, one of the physics professors did one of the first apps that taught you to type. You were doing a Tetris type thing, but no one did it because it taught them to type. But all the computer science majors became really good at typing just because they wanted to win the Tetris. But the Tetris game was great. And the side effect is you learn to type. But if you start with a typing app that has some games, that's not the way to do it. You got to get the order down.
Yeah, it's actually funny that you mentioned what was the coin that you used? Entertainment and education. Edutainment. I've actually heard that term earlier this year, and I was trying to see if I had it in my tab. There's a pretty popular influencer. I forget her name. But she runs this community for women, and she's quite young actually, and she talks about this, that like education is, and how like she was raised, and how a lot of folks don't necessarily put in entertainment inside of education. So education is not fun, right? So when you're thinking about learning, it's not fun. But like, when you think about your best teachers, it's always like the ones that really made it a very, very fun experience, so that like the knowledge actually retained. So I want to come back to curriculum building, just so I can steer our ship back. When you are building, so, you've been in the world of like a 4-year degree program. And then when you are taking that very spread out curriculum and then condensing it into like 17 weeks, what are you losing?
Well, is that a question for me or for Brian?
Take the question, and then I guess I'll let Brian take the question.
I think you got to begin with the end in mind, which is a Stephen Covey term. I think what you're trying to do in 17 weeks is to truly, fully teach one stack so that you understand it. A lot of the personas I see of people going to boot camps, I would call the frustrated dabbler. They know bits and pieces of multiple things, but they can't do anything real. So I think what you have to start with is, can I do something real so that after the boot camp, if they want to jump to a completely different stack, it's an analogy to something they already know. And it's you don't focus on technologies, you focus on, I want them to be able to do something real. And you get tempted to jump to technologies. But I think once you know the full stack, it's like, oh yeah, that's real similar to this other tool. It's just different syntax. So I think you don't want to be swinging your curriculum all the time. You really want to say, well, you can learn that other thing. It's real similar to what you already know. But your objective is, I can do real work now. And 17 weeks ago, I was just learning what recursion was.
It's that frustrated dabbler type often comes to MintBean's hackathons, and hackathons are a great way to gamify that process of building something real, like you said. So they'll come. I remember I talked to this one person. I can't remember what bootcamp they graduated from. I actually don't think they graduated from a bootcamp. They might have been self-taught. I can't remember now, to be honest. And they came to the first hackathon, and they tried to put together something. They got frustrated, and they messaged me and they said, Monarch, I'm going to quit. I get those messages sometimes. Like, some people are polite and they don't want to let you down, but they want to let you know that they're backing off. So I messaged him and I said, look, what's going on? And he said, I thought I was good. I know SQL, I know Node.js, I know React, but somehow I just can't compose them together. So he had a problem with synthesizing all those different parts of the stack. So I told him, okay, that's fine. Why don't you come back to the next one? This was when we were having 3 hackathons a week. So there was like 1 in 2 days. I told him, come back for the next one. And he can't, and when you do the next one, I want you to just deploy a blank screen. So he did exactly that. He came back and he deployed like a blank screen. He said, okay, Monarch, I didn't win the hackathon, obviously. I said, no, you didn't. And he said, what now? I said, okay, next hackathon, I want you to just put some text on the screen. So he comes back and he does that. And he gets so excited. He's like, Monarch, I put like hello world on it. It works. I said, that's great. He said, I don't know why I wasn't able to do this before. So I asked him, well, what changed? He said, well, I just found my way through it because I'd done it once before. So I was able to go through the hard part, which is deployment, faster. So I said, okay, come back. And next time I want you to build a counter. So he did that. And it had nothing to do with the hackathon challenge, but he built like a little counter app and he deployed it from scratch. And the fourth one, he built a full stack application, like a proper one, finally. And the fifth hackathon, he won. And in 2 months after that, he actually got a job paying something like 60 or 70,000, which is a little below or at the average salary that a bootcamp grad gets. And I was so proud of him. But if he didn't have that game of the hackathon to like build something real with, then he wouldn't have gotten the job because he wouldn't have ever built something real. So I like that phrase, the frustrated dabbler. I really like that phrase. I'm going to be using that. That's very accurate.
You know, it's what Monarch is talking about is one of the reasons we built another program called Learn a Bit, which is outside of our hackathons, because we saw that piece where it was like, okay, this challenge is too difficult. How can we break it down and bring it back to the fundamentals? And it's like, you're just working on HTML and CSS. Let's get that right. And once you get that right, then let's take on another challenge. And I think both Monarch and I see that with our community, is that once they come out of the bootcamp curriculum, like they want to, I don't know if it's like the pace that y'all are going at, like they want to learn new information constantly, but some of those concepts have been solidified. So what is, I guess, like, to the makers, like, what is the recommendation of, like, when you think about a 17-week program, like what concepts, like what how do I want to frame this? Like, sort of like, what are your presumptions of, like, when someone graduates at 17 weeks, like what should they be doing next?
Want to answer that, Brian?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that that was fascinating and horrifying to me at the previous boot camp is, for a while, we noticed this phenomena where, let's say, I think this is a couple of years ago now, so I think it was maybe something like 20% of students were reaching graduation and taking a break. And of those that took a break, half of them, so 10% of people who went through this 30-week program, 30-week plus week program, half of them took 2 weeks and did not write a single line of code. And of those, half never wrote a line of code again. So that's 5% of people go through this whole experience and stop. And so my advice would be to keep doing it. And to tie back to what Monarch was saying, I really try to socialize that this is an art and science of failure. Failure is the expected state when you're programming, because when it works, you're done and you move on to the next thing that's broken and failing, and keep working on it. And so I think that, one of the things in boot camps that we fight in so very many different ways, is that, this is very different than the way that you went to school and what the expectations are. Failure is not bad. It's expected and desirable, and it's something that we try to create. And, through working through the failure and breaking down the problem into, well, the whole problem's failing, so let's turn it into 10 steps. Okay, now let's work on step 1. Now we have 1 step that's working and 9 steps that are failing. And really, that's what it is. It's the application of language to problem solving to communicate with an alien is another way of describing this, to get the computer to do what you want it to do. But so many people get so distraught because what they're trying to do isn't working. But that's normal. I've been programming since I was 6, and everything that I write is broken because that's how it is. It's fails, and then you make it fail a little less, and then you make it fail a little less, and then you're done and you have to move on to the next thing. and one of the hardest things with the boot camp that hurts us both ways is that's different than a university is the time component. And it's not necessarily hours. Like we were talking about this before we started. If you do a measurement of hours, with most boot camps and most four-year degrees, the actual time in class is comparable. But we have less time for homework. We have less time for self-study. We have less time to let that information sort of gel. But then the other thing is that, this is a boot camp. We named it after a really intense something else because it's supposed to be almost close to brutally intense. That's how we're changing people's lives in a matter of weeks, is by making you work really, really hard. And some people, one of the adoption things that's difficult for a lot of students is they don't quite realize that. They think it's going to be, the high school or, if they have a degree or have done a bit of college, the college that, we're going to go to class for a few hours and then we're going to pretend to do our homework and then we're going to party. And it's like, no, you're going to go to class for 8 hours and then you're going to do your homework for 2 hours and then you're going to study for another 2 to 4 hours. And we don't have that, that same amount of time. It's so compressed that it's really, one of the biggest challenges in building curriculum for this is figuring out what to put and when to put it. I don't know about you, Dan, but I've got about 8 weeks of stuff that I would like to cover in the first day. Yeah. Because it's all critically important to prepare everyone for what's happening next.
So part of a few things on this, I want to go back to something, Navi, you talked about earlier, which is like, if you want people in high school to get excited in computer science, the problem that I see now is AP computer science is often taught by someone who can't really code, and it's in Java. It's not, I want to teach you how to use Python to write games. So yeah. What we find is a lot of people in high school who aren't hackers come to college without even knowing coding. But that's one of the things that I think when we talked about edutainment, if there's ways that in high school they made computer science fun, it would be so different than what it is now. Brian, you mentioned something about, how you want to get people to really talk with the computer. What I said, the computer is a high-speed moron. You have to tell it exactly what it needs to be told, exactly the way you tell it, and then it'll listen to you. But that's really what we're doing in the boot camp. And I think the challenge is, if you really want to learn French, you go to Paris and you speak just French. That's what boot camps are. If you really want to learn how to speak to the high-speed moron, you just immerse yourself in it. And when you're in a normal four-year degree program, you got a lot of plates that are spinning that have nothing to do with it. And what I've learned is learning a coding language can be like learning Mandarin Chinese. All of a sudden, it clicks because your brain now goes, I get it. And then you start dreaming in Mandarin. But that's what we have to work with you on, is how fast do we spoon feed you so that you get to the point, I get it now. I can start thinking like that high-speed moron.
Yeah. And it's like, one of the things that's always mystified me is that people tend to lump this as a math thing. And sure, math is involved, math is useful, but we call them languages for a reason. Yeah. Because it's a way to communicate with this very fast moron, which is a great way to put it, or this, it's a truly alien intelligence. It's not your Star Wars or Star Trek alien, which is, someone who's human with one dominant trait and, looks slightly different. It's a true alien intelligence. It operates and thinks at a fundamentally different level than we do. And this job is about, finding ways to solve problems by communicating with this alien. And you have to enmesh yourself in it. You have to do it. I really believe that this is a skill. Programming is something that you perform. And one of the things that, we're really working on in our curriculum is more deliberately teaching this revelation that people have at some point in time, that it's not, it's not magic, it's not wizardry, it's not, an experienced programmer has this big, thick spell book and they say, yes, I need to communicate with an API to get the user's profile page. That is on page 794. I shall write the first line of the spell. I should write the second line. No, it's like, okay, well, we've got, we've got an API and it's a SQL, or, it's attached to a SQL database. There's these endpoints. This is how I'm going to communicate with it to get this alien to give me what I want. And it's a really hard thing to do. And it goes back to what I said earlier about expectations, with what people expect this experience to be like is something that we really have to work hard against and try to find, find those parallels, because, like Dan was saying, the secret to this is once you figured out like one route end to end, all of it. There's details, there's improvements, there's efficiencies. You can write a boring for loop in Python, or you can do clever Pythonic things that do it in one line. But ultimately, if you understand the path from end to end, then you can adapt yourself to what the employer's tech stack is, because no one has the same tech stack. And oftentimes you can't experience that tech stack until you work there, because it's so specific, it's so unique. And I think what we really do well with boot camps is that doing that and tying the problem solving to it, the problem solving mindset. And one of the things that I don't know if this is slightly mischievous or not, but like I hear about things from my friends that work in the industry, and I find ways to work them into the curriculum. And I had someone interview a candidate for a senior programming job who had 20 years of enterprise Java development, and they couldn't do FizzBuzz, which is kind of one of those, it's like the step after Hello World for your journey to programming. It's when you really start to understand flow control and conditionals. And it's just basically you do a counter and you print either fizz or buzz or FizzBuzz, depending on what the number is. But there's a lot of deeper things to it. And it's like, oh, well, I'm working on our admissions curriculum. You're now not going to be able to get into our boot camp until you can do FizzBuzz. And not to beat up on this person, because it's almost in a lot of ways a different skill set than what we do, working with those larger monolithic systems. But it's just this problem solving ability is a learnable, practicable skill that I think with boot camps, we really focus on doing. And once you have learned that complete stack, you can apply it to whatever. This is, I joke that this is a secret, but it's really not a secret. I've been working at boot camps for years. I don't know Express. I've written curriculum on Express. I don't know Express. I know other things to write APIs and endpoints, and I can use that to see it. But that's not because I'm special. It's just, that's what the job is. And that's the skill we're trying to teach you, is to do that sort of thing.
But you could learn it as soon as you needed to.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the key.
Yeah, that's fair. No, that's fair.
I actually had before we move on from this thread, Brian brought up something really interesting when he was saying all of that. And I had a follow-up question with a kicker for Dan as well.
Okay.
And I was like, maybe I'll be able to frame it. But so Brian, you basically emphasize that, look, like this is going to be intense. And if you take a break right after, you're going to lose all that knowledge, or at least get disjointed from that process that you've just been through. So it's really a full immersion. What it reminded me of was some of these international football clubs, soccer clubs. I heard a story once where they have one of these clubs, they have this practice ground somewhere in the Caribbean, beautiful location, mountains and a sea. And there's a few football grounds there, soccer. I keep saying football. And they play soccer there. But they're not allowed to have cell phones. These are grown adults. They're being paid millions of dollars, but when they're there, they can't have cell phones. They're not allowed television. They're not allowed the internet, and all they do is play soccer. That's it. You eat good food, you have conversations with your team, but no electronics. You're completely cut off from the world. And it's like this monastic way of practicing soccer. And whenever I look at boot camps, Sometimes I just wish that somebody would start a boot camp somewhere up in the mountains where they just have like a firewall block on WhatsApp and Zoom and everything other than GitHub and Stack Overflow.
The monk
And
boot camp.
yeah, the monk camp.
Monarch,
but
actually, they're doing that for the MBA as well. I don't know if you know that. There's a place
okay.
in Italy. It's like there's these small villages, and they'll take like these really well-known basketball stars, and they place them in the middle of nowhere in these tiny Italian cities, and they're not allowed like cell phones and stuff like that. So
I think actually that's what I was thinking of. I was trying to illustrate a point, but yeah, that's the thing I was thinking of. Yes, exactly. And I guess my question then is, on one hand, is going to a boot camp, because it's so intense, is it really more akin to like basically an initiation? It's like, is it akin to you're going to be taught the secrets of the universe in this one particular aspect, and you should take it that seriously? Like, is that the mindset that people should be going into boot camps with? Because it's going to be intense. I didn't do a boot camp, but I can tell you, when I was learning how to code, I would dream in code. It was weird. And it was like my brain was being rewired. And for Dan, from your perspective from the university, in university, you're able to take all these optional courses. That lets you customize the curriculum to your personality. I know this is like a two-parter, and I'm posing this to both of you, and Brian, feel free to answer. But I've noticed that some personalities respond well to certain aspects of coding than others. So somebody who's really outgoing, artsy-fartsy, they're probably going to be way better at front end, not necessarily, but they're probably going to be way more interested in front end. And the people I've worked with who are on the back end, they tend to be more like me. Like, they're just, plain Jane, really boring. They don't really want to talk to people, and they're basically hermits. They can just go into their little cloisters.
No fluff, just functionality.
Exactly. There you go. So the two different types. Robert Persig in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, he phrased this as the romantic personality and the classic personality. And I'm wondering if all of this has to be taken into account in a boot camp setting, or do you guys take it into account in a boot camp setting where some people are just better suited for, say, pure front end, and others are just better suited for pure back end? Like, how do you, like, is there, so far, because we're only like 10 years into the boot camp industry, we're only 10 years old, how do you guys offer guidance over there? Is there flexibility? Is this even a conversation that happens in curriculum?
It happens. In our curriculum, we do a capstone at the end, and you see how rare the capstone is database or back end. Mm-hmm. It's often front end because you can do something cool that everyone sees how cool it is. It's hard to show how cool some of the back end stuff is. But going to what Brian said earlier, employers really want to know, do you love? So quick step backwards. When we've done prep classes, when we did it here in San Luis Obispo tied to coding, I asked people during the prep stage 2 questions. I said, don't answer them till the end of this prep. 1, do you like computer science? And 2, are you good at computer science? And I said, if you can't say yes to both of those, probably don't do it. But we gave them the exposure to it. But I mean, if you've graduated from a boot camp and you have nothing new in your GitHub for a month since you graduated, that's going to really hurt you.
Yeah.
Because they really want to see, all you have to do, Mr. or Mrs. Employer, is point me. I love this stuff. Just point me. You don't have to motivate me. You just need to point me. And I think what you do in your spare time, like some employers will say, what do you read in your spare time? Who do you follow on Twitter? It's just, what have you done recently that's cool? And if you say, I don't know, I've kind of put all that stuff on hold because I was tired at the end of the boot camp, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, well, and I like to think of it with both boot camps and universities in mind in this answer, is there are lots of different people with lots of different needs and desires to work at lots of different companies. And there's, that it's good that the market is starting to diverge, and give different options for different people, and including universities. I hope it's not scandalous that I think getting a bachelor's degree is a great idea for a lot of people. If it works for you, if you have the ability to do it, it's one path to success, one of many. And there's, it might not be as focused, but that can be a good thing, because one, it does let people make sure that this is what they like to do and not something else. And two, as a hiring manager, I love to see a degree, because I know that means if I ask someone to do something stupid that they don't want to do because I don't want to do it and I don't have the time to do it, they're going to at least do an okay job at it because they completed college, and that's a lot of what
Many of
college
the classes they didn't want to take.
I love the paradigm that we're in, that we're calling getting a bachelor's degree a controversial thing. Like, wow, just insane.
But I mean, with this, I at least don't see the bootcamp world, in my part in it, is like hostile to that. It's just an alternative for a lot of different people in a lot of different spots, including people who going and getting a bachelor's degree isn't an option for a lot of reasons, or people who've already done that and they don't want to be an accountant anymore. But so I think it's great that we also have boot camps now, where we have at App Academy, if you want to do this quickly and you're willing to melt your face, you can get it done in 16 weeks. But I think we tell you on the website now, expect to spend 100 hours a week doing this.
That's clear. I like that.
Yeah, I love that. I honestly really appreciate when marketing is aligned with reality, and what really pisses me off is when when the admission says something that doesn't align with what the curriculum is, and it doesn't align with the truth of how difficult the process is going to be. So I appreciate when there's transparency like that.
But like all things, it's a balance, because there's definitely a middle zone of people who need to be convinced that they can do this, that they can pull this off, who need a little bit of help. But then there's also a lot of, alternatives. We have a 24-week program. We have a part-time program that we're piloting right now. There's other schools that, my previous school was 30 weeks, and then I think it was 40 weeks. But the promise was you never have to do anything outside of class. And I think that's a good approach as well. And there's, I've told people for a long time when they're doing the interview process to, be yourself. Be yourself, and it's really hard until you're sitting on the other side of the table to internalize this, until you've had the privilege of hiring people. But really, you're much better off just being open and honest with who you are and what you want, because if you want to show up at work at 9 and leave at 5 and go home and never think about these people elsewhere, there's jobs for you, and there's jobs who will love you for that. And if you want to show up at work at noon and start coding, code till 3 a.m. and start drinking at 7 p.m., there's some people that sounds wonderful for, and there's some people that's a nightmare. And what you don't want to do is, a lot of people who are upset about the 9-to-5 grind or work-life balance is because they're in the wrong, they didn't have, sometimes it's just down to ability. Sometimes you don't have the choice, but often it's worried about the right thing. And I think having options and having many paths to doing this is a really important thing, because different things work for different people. Like one of the most informative things I learned is my brother went to the boot camp that I went to, or that I taught at, went through, and I taught him, and he messaged me one day, is like, how is this other teacher here? Why haven't they fired him yet? Like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, he's terrible. You're great. Like, I love the way that you teach. Funny enough, we're related. He likes the way that I think.
That's crazy.
I like the way that you teach.
I can't learn from Monarch. Like, I just can't. It's so bad. Like, it's, like we learned that very quickly on, that he can't teach me.
Yeah.
But it affects our relationship, and it just is like a downhill path to destruction. But go on.
And but there's lots of, that's what I'm saying, is there's lots of different learning styles, different things. And the really funny thing to me about that is that instructor was higher rated than I was in every metric that we had. It was close, but he was better rated by more students. And then later on, the other instructor in that, like, after we were no longer with that school, students would find our videos, and like we would just get random messages on LinkedIn. It was like, oh, all of the other instructors are terrible, but you're wonderful. And we both got like the same amount of these. And so that just tells me that there's lots of opportunity, and having variety is good and healthy. There's not one right way to do this.
I want you to pause there for a second, because there was a question, actually, Jamie. I think Jamie asked a wonderful question. I want to go back a little bit, and this also actually kind of hits our hackathons as well, because we've gotten, when you create a curriculum where it's one size fits all, and you're, the things that I'm hearing is that like different instructors work for different people, different mentors work for different people. Some people learn a little bit more differently. Some people process information differently. So, even like I'll come to the question in a second, but even for our hackathons, we've often got the feedback of like, maybe we should have a tier system where it's kind of like beginner, intermediate, advanced. And we've kind of like, we've thought about it, and we've thought about the pros and cons, and what it would, like you said, the leaderboard, and like what that would mean to our community and how it would make them feel, because like that's really important for us. So considering that, and Monarch, I think you can jump in on this as well, because it does fit us. Any thoughts from the panel on how important it is to cater to different learning styles in a bootcamp curriculum? So I'm almost thinking sort of like an evaluation that happens at the admissions, where now we're kind of like inching maybe closer to traditional models, where it's kind of like, hey, we're gonna maybe put this inside of your curriculum, and maybe you're a little bit more advanced and you could do this. I don't know, just throwing ideas out there.
Well, one of the things that with Full Stack we put a high priority on is this ongoing check-in of how's it going? How's it going? The beauty in the technology is if the lecture didn't work, there's so many other resources you could do for the same thing. I remember from a long time ago having to learn the programming language Lisp and recursion. I just wanted someone else to explain it until one of you made sense to me. And I think that's part of what you do is when you're in a class, because I teach now also, you have to say, I can't completely change how I teach you because there's multiple people in the class, but I can teach you how to find different resources that you don't just hear me repeat myself, because if you don't understand the way I explained it the first time, you're probably not going to explain it when I say the exact same thing a second time. But to know if someone's starting to lose confidence, that's when you really want to talk with them. It's like, here's some other ways that we can handle it. This is a tough section right here. But the problem in traditional higher ed, there's no ongoing pulse. Are we losing you? And so that's a big learning for us, is just to know, are we losing you emotionally, as it's tough because it is coming really fast. And if you wait until a big test to know that, it's too late. You really want to know on an ongoing basis, do you feel like you're keeping up?
But here's the thing, right? I appreciate that. I feel like it's not across the board, right?
It's
like
not.
when you look at the sector, it's not across the board. Some institutions are doing it really well. Clearly, I think you guys both have it, the methodology down really well, but there's a lot of students and grads that the pulse was there. Like, it was very obvious that things are not looking good. But no one really paid attention, so when I think of the curriculum and the speed that it goes at, I really think that sometimes it's not for everyone because of that.
It's hard, especially when it's part-time. Because when it's part-time, you have another master, which is your day job. But I think it's just something you have to work through on how to make it your number one priority. Because to me, going to a boot camp part-time is very similar to you got a full-time day job. And like Monarch, trying to get a master's degree with a full-time job. It's the same issue,
Yeah.
whether it's getting a formal degree or doing a boot camp at night, but you just have to say, how important is it for you? And then how are you going to prioritize? I'm a big Stephen Covey fan. One of his favorite sayings I really like is, the main thing is to make the main thing the main thing.
Okay, I feel really like out of touch. I have no idea who Stephen Covey is.
He wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Oh, that guy. Okay.
Yeah, but I think there's some things about when you prioritize your time, do you even know what the main thing is?
Okay.
And with your decisions, are you doing the main thing? Because it's where you spend your time. If you don't consciously prioritize it, you might just spend it where it's fun.
Yeah, and I think that I mean it's really tough, our goal is to provide a consistent experience and reach the most people possible. But like App Academy is not the right school for some people, and other schools aren't the right school for some people. And then some schools, like one of the things that I think is interesting about App Academy that I would hate as a student, but B, I think is one of the most valuable things that we do, is we require the students to pair program with almost everything that they do. And so really what we're trying to make sure we do and continuously update is that, and as I mentioned earlier, we're revising our introductory or preparatory or admissions coursework, is to set the expectations as much as we can for how this experience is going to work. Because it's not right for everyone. I do believe that while people are more receptive to, auditory learning or visual learning and things like that, I really think we're all truly kinesthetic. You have to do it, and learning by doing, and that's difficult for people to transition to it. It's in particular, I think it's the main cause of tutorial hell, is that for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it's like I've been spending 8 hours a day for months, and I don't know anything. I can't do anything. Like, maybe that's what happened to this student, where they couldn't they couldn't complete a task in a boot camp. And it's because we're really good at lying to ourselves about whether or not we know something or can do something unless we've actually done it. And even to this day, I catch myself learning a new technology, and I read a line of code and I say, yes, I'm an experienced developer who knows what they're doing, and I understand this. Yes, I understand this. I'm very smart. I understand this. And then I get to the end and I have no idea what it does. And then I've got to paste it into a file, start poking it with a stick and start doing it. And getting people on board to that is hard, because we come from all of these different backgrounds, all of these different experiences. And, it's like one of the analogies that I use is that, we're like gardeners, to our students. We'll work really hard to help you grow. We'll use all of the knowledge that we have to build a greenhouse that you can grow in, that you can thrive in. We'll give you the water you need, the food that you need. But there's a bunch of you, and all of you have slightly different needs. And one of you might happen to be by the corner and catch a draft. And it's, we do everything that we can, but ultimately you can't make a plant grow. The plant's got to grow. The plant's got to do the growing. And that's a tough thing to accept, because we want, we want to be brought on. And in some ways we have to be, again, going back to the boot camp thing, we're here to make you run, even though you don't feel like running today. Say, get up, it's time to run. Let's go. You can do this. You can do another push-up. Let's do it. I think that, within a boot camp, like we try to provide a variety of materials, a variety of angles for teaching one particular lesson, one particular thing. But ultimately, it's also important that the students do the same that they would do in any other experiences. Use outside resources, form study groups, get your friends to help you. I like to joke that sometimes that we're going to start teaching this with interpretive dance. And then I found out that the best way to learn sorts is Polish folk dance. And if you're learning how to program and haven't seen this yet and don't understand sorts or think you understand sorts, look up the Polish dancing sorts. And it's it's the best way, or at least for me, I thought it was great. But again, there's lots of different learning. And Dan said it earlier. It's, I want to hear it over and over again until it clicks. Like when I'm learning something on my own now, my usual response is to Google it, open up the first 5 or 10 links and skim over them until one of them looks like it makes sense to me. And it's not because the first 9 were bad or don't work for other people. It's just that's the secret magic that makes it work its way, and you click and you say, aha, I understand.
I want to build on a little bit on what Brian just said. Is we had this free introduction class here for coding. And what we found is as soon as it got hard, a lot of people would quit. So what we tried something a little different. We made the introduction class like $250. And if you attend 90% of the lectures and take the final, you'll just get it back. And it was amazing how the study groups formed when it got hard. Because if it was free, the value was assumed to be nothing. But when there was a hurdle and we had to figure out, well, how high can we make it? The people will still do it. But it really worked because they said, I'm not going to walk away from that money. But we knew when the study groups were going to form. And that's what happened is like, okay, together we're going to figure this out, because I think it is hard. Another analogy tied to what Brian was saying, I dabble in the guitar. I can read a guitar book and I think I got this. I put the guitar in my hand. I don't got this at all. But when I read the book, I go, yeah, I get all this. But part of it is just practice. It's muscle memory. It's getting, this is instinctive to me, not just theoretical to me.
And it's practice, and particularly if you're new and starting out and looking for a job, it's getting into a point where you have that knowledge and skill fresh and at the beginning of your mind. And there's so many rabbit holes in this work, or sometimes I kind of think of it like, you're going across like the desert and there's canyons in the desert. And when you're a beginner and you don't have, particularly if you don't have any help, and this is really, I think, the primary help that we offer, is you don't know what the routes are. So all of these canyons, you've got to go 20 miles this way, 20 miles this way, looking for a bridge, looking for a path down. Sometimes you find a path down and that's kind of progress, but now you're stuck at the bottom and you've got to figure out how to get back to the top. And having a guide saves you so much time. And then yourself, when you become the guide and having that knowledge top of mind, that skill top of mind, you get better. I think a lot of us are learning right now as we're in at least a little bit emerging, from our COVID hibernation. My body doesn't work as efficiently as it used to. I used to be able to run this. I used to be able to walk this. I used to be able to play this sport. And now I'm slow. Now I can't do it. But it'll come back with practice and with skill. And it's always, this is a really hard job. That's why it pays well. And building structures in a way that provide just the right level of difficulty, is what the challenge is. There's kind of 2 concepts that we make use of. And it's, as you learn, your ability improves at somewhat a linear level. And you can have a task that's a little too hard for you, a little beyond your skill. And it's a concept called novel difficulty. And when you're given something that's just quite out of your capacity, you actually perform the best and you grow the fastest. And it's similar to if you've ever had the opportunity to play like chess or tennis or video games against someone who's truly world class. You do the best you've ever done. You get obliterated, but you do the best you've ever done. And you think to yourself, oh, if I could only do this all the time, I would be so much better. And you are getting better with that. The problem is it leads to burnout. And so then on the other side of it is the lower end where things are easier. If you do a task that is just below your current level of competency, it's great, particularly if you weren't that competent last week. And it cements your knowledge. It helps you grow and make this growth permanent, or at least longer term. And it's one of the things that we work towards growing the ability of our students as we do this. But it's never one size fits all. And we do as much as we can to help everyone as much as we can, but there's also a lot of personal responsibility to fill in your own individual gaps because they're different for everyone. You know, I'm terrible at CSS. It frustrates me, it annoys me, it makes me want to throw my computer out the window. And so I would have needed more practice for that. You know, I would have needed extra resources. I would have needed more time.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's okay. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
I don't get to be a programmer. It just means I need more time on something.
That's fair. I think that you guys are extremely passionate about this stuff. It's very evident. You know, I kind of want to give a spotlight to Monarch. He's been awfully quiet. Monarch, you deal with a lot of developers that are kind of like past this curriculum. So a lot of people that come into the MintBean community that are looking for mentorship from you have sort of like they're right in that incubation period that we refer to as like the struggle, you know, where they've learned something new and now they don't feel confident enough to go out there, or the employers are kind of rejecting them because there's not, maybe the skill level isn't there, maybe they're not applying enough. So what are you seeing from your side, the gaps that maybe the curriculums have, just because you work so closely with them? Like where are you seeing that, hey, maybe the institution could do a better job at maybe teaching students more of this concept or another concept?
I don't know if it's fair to put any failures, the responsibility for each and every failure on the school. I don't think that's fair, because the school, it is a one-to-many setting, and it is meant to be cost effective. The number of hours of instruction that a bootcamp student gets there, and that too from a very qualified instructor who's been a software engineer, that quality of instruction, I mean, you would have to pay possibly multiple tens of thousands of dollars, like 50, maybe $100,000 to get that kind of education in that span of time if you were to get it in a one-to-one setting. And first off, you'd have to go out there and try and find somebody who's willing to do that for you. Most people aren't. So let's just call a spade a spade. It is a greenhouse, like the analogy that Brian used is beautiful. It's a greenhouse. And if you're catching a draft, it's your responsibility to pick your butt up and move away from the draft. Now, the problem, and this is true for universities as well, this is true for high schools, this is true for any institutional one-to-many learning setting. So it's the tool that's being used over here, let's not misunderstand it for one-to-one mentoring, right? When you, so I haven't charged for mentoring anybody so far. Like, this is just stuff that I do for fun. And I can share a couple of stories. The moral of the story, I'll give it to you folks first, is the devil is in the details. And there are so many details in this mix that you don't know where you're failing. Sometimes a student knows they're failing, they just don't know what they're failing at. And I love what Dan said, you know, the main thing, what was it again?
The main thing is to make the main thing the main thing.
The main thing. There you go. The main thing is to make the main thing the main thing. But you can either through ignorance or through ignorance, like ignoring what's going on, you can just go astray. So here's one story. Somebody came to me and said, Monarch, I'm so amazing when it comes to building stuff. Like when I'm doing tutorials, I can get through the tutorials. I just can't build anything. And we started working that's actually what we diagnosed like while we were working together. And that's what came out of it. But they were just not able to build software when they would do tutorials. After I questioned them, turns out they could do tutorials. They could go through the whole tutorial, do the database, the back end, the front end, stitch it together, deploy it even. And they could build, like, for example, a Twitter clone from a tutorial in the course of 2 or 3 days. Turns out what they were doing was, because that feeling of building a Twitter clone in 2 days was so powerful, it made her feel so good about herself. As soon as she stepped outside of the tutorial, when she started actually building something with her own 2 hands without the guide of a tutorial, and started trying to solve those problems herself by Googling and working with the code, she couldn't even get a simple blank application deployed in 3 or 4 days. Meanwhile, the tutorial, like that was always there. Oh, you know what? I don't think I'm ready for this yet. I'm just going to go and buy another tutorial. So she was ignoring the fact that the illusion of competence that the tutorial gives you was basically, it's used to her basically. And she just kept going back to tutorials like over and over again. So I told her, look, you got to stop that. And that's your particular problem, given your psychological makeup and your inherent flaws as a human being, or strengths. The flaws and strengths are basically two sides of the same coin here. Because of your personality, you're getting stuck in tutorial hell. Do this. Just put the tutorial hell aside. I'm telling you, as a senior engineer, I cannot build Twitter, even a basic version, in 2 days with that stack. Maybe on Ruby on Rails, but with that stack that you're using, MERN stack, I can't do that in 2 days as a senior engineer. I would probably take a week or 2 weeks to put something together that's respectable. And that kind of blew her mind. She didn't know that senior engineers work that slowly. I mean, it's engineering. Another person came to me and they were getting frustrated because they were running out of runway after boot camp. They wanted to they wanted to get a job. They came out of retail. They had a hospitality background. I'm not going to name names. Lots of people in the community know them. And they were telling me, look, like, I don't know if this is for me. I feel really dumb when I'm working with the code. So we sat down, we diagnosed their particular problems. Turns out the anxiety was shutting their brain down. I mean, this is a well-known fact. Anxiety will make you stupid in the moment. This is the flight, fight, freeze triad, where if you have anxiety, basically your reptile brain is telling you you're standing in front of a tiger. That's what your reptile brain thinks. And the anxiety will make you either run or fight or stand in place. All three of them are stupid things to do. Like stupid as in you're just in type 1 thinking, you're just going fast, and you don't want to analyze the situation, and your higher thinking just shuts down when you're anxious. That's what he was going through. So I said, dude, like, this is what you're going through. He said, that makes sense. And I said, how much runway do you have left? He said, I have 3 months left. I said, okay, fact is, that's slim. And can you get a part-time job to compensate? What can you do to make the tiger go away for a bit? He said, yeah, I could probably get a part-time job. I don't want to. I said, okay, good. For 1 week though, all I want you to do for 1 week is I want you to do something that you love. What do you love doing? Turns out that they were a graphic artist in a previous lifetime. So they love doing art, and they love video games. Their friend was a video game developer. So I said, and they would collaborate. So I said, for 1 week, all I want you to do is build a video game in JavaScript. That's all I want you to do. Put your stress aside, just burn this 1 week for me. You trust me as a mentor, you burn this 1 week for me. And I'm not giving you any guarantees, but I want you to do this for me because you need to trust me on this. I'm not giving you any guarantees, but this might work. And they did that. They built a really cool game. At the end of that 1 week, they said, Monarch, can I go another week? Because this is fun. And I'm actually coding more than I've coded in the last month. I coded more in 1 week than I coded in the whole month. I said, yeah, dude, go for it. So they kept coding more and more and more. The right opportunity came up and they got hired as a video game developer in JavaScript, which is like unheard of. But they got hired as a video game developer in JavaScript. So I think it comes down to, after bootcamp, I think it comes down to your particular problem. And your particular problem could be anything. It could be anything. It could be your kid screams at night so you don't get enough sleep. I mean, it could be anything. Who knows? So the value of a mentor is there. Not everybody needs a mentor. Like, I won't be one of those people who say everybody needs a mentor. A lot of people 80% of people get jobs within the first year of most boot camps after graduating. But yeah, like, the devil is in the details. I think that personal failings are personal failings, not as in you should be guilty for them, but as in the fault lies within yourself and you have to debug yourself. So that's kind of my takeaway. I think boot camps are great, but I don't think they'll ever reach 100% success rate. I don't think that's not the tool for it. That's not the setting for it. That's not the intent. So that's kind of my takeaway.
It's interesting. I feel really wholesome after this conversation. I don't know how like everyone else feels, but this has been like, this is our 5th session since Eon, like since we launched Eon, and this has been the most wholesome conversation, and there have been really, really great conversations. So thank you, everyone, the panelists and everyone who's interacting in chat and listening. give us that. So I really appreciate it. We're at the top of the hour. I do want you guys to say one last thing before we leave. We have a networking session that opens up right now. Mabina, I think, dropped it. Yeah, she did. So please join that networking session if you can. It's a really great way to just connect with your peers. We do have some recruiters that are kind of coming and rolling into these. We have 8 of them, so it's been a lot of fun. I've gotten a lot of feedback from some of the recruiters that they're really enjoying talking to the devs, so that's been a nice feather in our cap. But yeah, guys, Dan, Brian, Monarch, Monarch came out of his sabbatical in order to support me on this conference, and I have so much gratitude to you for that, Dan. It's been a privilege to have you on this panel. You right before you hopped up, you said that I don't know how much value I'm going to bring into this panel, and I don't know why you would have ever thought that, because you're invaluable. And the expertise that you bring in are just enormous. And I truly mean this. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. Brian, you know already I have so much admiration for you as well, and the entire App Academy team. So thank you for being on this call. Before we leave, I want you guys to say some final words of whether it's on the curriculum or what students should really focus on post bootcamp.
I think what I would say is Monarch's example of the person who started doing something in JavaScript where it felt like fun as opposed to work. Find that. Because if it feels like work, it will be work, and you'll try to talk yourself out of it. If it feels like fun, you'll realize, wow, I love this. And then the employers will say, I'm going to give you something what you already proved to me you love, but just find it. And that was great coaching advice, Monarch, because if it feels like fun, you don't mind working long hours.
And to tie to another thing that Monarch said with the example of a person who got stuck, that I think is probably the most important revelation with this, is that that a programmer isn't a person who follows steps to accomplish something. A programmer is a person who comes up with those steps. So my advice would be, don't follow steps unless you're finding out how to adapt something to something you're creating. So if you need to add something new to a project you're working on, do the tutorial for it and then add it to your project in a different way. Create those steps, because that's what this job is. And that's why that person in the other example probably couldn't deploy something, is because you have to come up with the steps on your own and decide what those steps are and then do them. One of the biggest complaints we get is that this project isn't any good, the steps are unclear. And I say, I know, that's because I took some of them out. And it's because that's how you learn the job. Eventually, there are no steps.
Sit there like Mr. Burns.
No, I promise. I always come. It's always from a place of what's the most effective and what will help our students become the best programmers they can be as quickly as possible.
Sure, that's a good recovery. Monarch, any last words?
Yeah, I think you just got to be kind to yourself, because human beings function optimally when they're happy. And if you're kind to yourself, there's actually no difference between fun and work. There really isn't. It's an arbitrary distinction. And if you approach it with curiosity and play, and you have to cultivate that, if you can cultivate that sense of curiosity and play and be happy while you're coding, get into that meditative flow state where it just feels like a video game. Yeah, like try and be there and be kind to yourself, because you won't be successful if you are constantly beating yourself up for every failure. Because like, either Brian or Dan brought up earlier, failure is the default state. And imagine how much you'll beat yourself up if you keep failing. I think it was Brian. But yeah, make the main thing the main thing. That's the main thing, or whatever it was.
I like your version too, Monarch.
I love it. That's a great way to end the segment. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
And Brian, thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.